On today's Faith versus Culture, we're talking about the challenges of unexpected pregnancy and the unexpected joys of motherhood. That's coming up.
To have sex before you marry is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
There are problems of sin and habit that cannot be solved outside the person of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, welcome to this week's episode of Faith versus Culture on Mother's Day weekend. Dan Andros, how are you today?
I'm doing great.
Well, it's good to have you here, and it's also good to have our guest today, Dr. Nicole Saphier. If anybody watches Fox News, you'll be familiar to her. You'll see her. You will have seen her face talking about all kinds of stuff, a lot of medical stuff. But she also has a new book coming out called Love Mom. So, Dr. Saphier, thank you for being here. How are you?
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited to talk about this new this new project that I've been working on. You know, historically, a lot of the stuff I do is all health related, health policy related, because obviously that is a big passion of mine. But I'm also a mom of three, and I have kind of a non-traditional path to motherhood that I'm so grateful to be able to share with others.
Well, Dr. Saphier, for people who might not know, tell us a little bit about your story. You are a board-certified radiologist, a Fox News contributor, and also a mother of three. And your first child you were pregnant with as a teenager. Talk about some of that story.
Yeah, so anyone who really knows me from Fox knows that I'm an open book, and I am open and willing to talk about anything. And one of the big things that have shaped the person I am today is the fact that when I was in high school, between my junior and senior years, I did find out I was pregnant. Obviously, this was not a planned event, certainly unexpected. And, you know, after having some internal reflection, talking to my family, and, you know, really coming to a decision, I decided to have my child. So I was that statistic. I was the pregnant teenager walking the high school hallways all throughout my senior years. It was a very lonely and isolating time. But having my son and growing up as he grew up really kind of molded who I am today. And, you know, I had a lot of people at the time telling me that if I went forward with the pregnancy, that I certainly wasn't going to reach all of the professional aspirations that I had at the time. So I've pretty much spent the last 24 years doing everything possible to prove them wrong.
It really seems like a counter or almost an anti-woman message to kind of put this fear onto young women such as yourself who are pregnant to say you can't do this. It seems like an uninspiring message, also an untrue message. We have so many examples of people doing that. I mean, what would you say to, maybe even someone who's in your situation right now, who might be a teen who's pregnant and they're hearing all of these sorts of things? What sort of encouragement would you give them?
Yeah, you know, the way that I really look at it is, you know, we're all kind of on this path of life. And at that age, I knew that my path was I really wanted to be a doctor. From an early age, I knew I wanted to help and heal people. So that was my path. The pregnancy kind of stopped me. You know, there was an obstacle in the way, or at least that's what it felt like. And that's what everyone was telling me about, was that I have this huge obstacle. And so my options were, all right, well, I just stop and stand still and just kind of stay stagnated. Do I try and climb over that boulder, that huge obstacle, which maybe wasn't possible either? Or can I carve out a path and just go around it? Maybe it's going to take me a little bit longer. Maybe it's going to be a little bit more challenging, that path. But as long as you lean on your faith, your family, and your friends, that path is still there. You just have to create it. And I personally drew a lot of my strength from knowing that there is a greater path. And no matter how many obstacles are put in my way, it's not going to be anything more than I can handle, because the plan was for me to be a physician, for me to be a healer, and I just needed to figure out how to still get there.
Mm. Yeah, I want to ask you too, what were, there are obstacles in your way that kind of slowed you down or maybe changed the course of your path to becoming a doctor when you, of course, became pregnant. But then also, I think you hear those messages from people externally trying to influence you to go in one way or another. What was it? I know you said you had a moral conviction that you felt a responsibility to your child. You wanted to move forward with having your child. But what was it that kind of kept you grounded and tethered to that decision? Because I'm sure there are moments when you hear the same thing so many times, you're like, well, maybe I am crazy for moving forward with having my child. Maybe I should make a different decision. What kept you tied to that moral conviction?
I think as humans, it is natural for us all to have self-doubt and wonder if we're making the right decisions, wondering what the outcome is going to be. I can say I still have some of those moments right now, but in that time, it didn't seem so black and white, and there was a lot of noise, a lot of negativity around me. And it was very socially isolating. And at the time, I had a teen Bible, which was something that I used to love all the time. And I went through that teen Bible front and back, looking through any sources of inspiration, any sources of comfort that could help guide me in my ways. And so I had my highlighters out, color quoted a whole bunch of different scripture. And I even had the tabs for quick reference, because once I made my decision, I knew that there was going to be moments where I second guessed them, moments where I felt like maybe it's all too much. I'm not sure I can actually handle that. But as long as I was able to go back and kind of reinforce that I'm going to be okay and nothing is being put in front of me that's going to be too much for me to handle, then that also gave me comfort.
Yeah, that's really great. And I mean, you're talking about these different paths that we take, maybe unexpected paths to something that we'd hope for, but God ultimately always has a path for us. And I think part of that is humbling ourselves and just saying, okay, God, what do you have for me? And being willing to accept that. And, it sounds like you were on that journey as well. And that's really great. I wanted to ask you about, culture today seems in a lot of instances to sort of, whether intentionally or not, sort of downgrade motherhood, particularly stay-at-home moms. Do you see that trend happening? And what can we do to kind of combat sort of the image of motherhood, right? Like where it's not like this thing that's just hampering you from, a career and things of that nature.
Yeah, you know what? Some of our movements in the last couple of decades have been a bit of a double-edged sword, where we've fought for so much equality rights and the right to work and so many rights of women that has just made us equal as compared to our male counterparts. But in that, it's kind of taking away from kind of the beauty of what it is to be a motherhood, to be a mom. I mean, for women who choose to want to stay home and raise their children, some who want to educate their children in their home, it's almost like there's a stigma these days that, well, what we fought for all of these things, why are you staying home? Why aren't you out working? Why aren't you doing these other things? And I think, it's taking away the innate feelings of women to nurture and grow their family. And I think, as a working mom myself, staying home is equally as hard as going to work every single day. And it is such a blessing to be able to be home. And so these women who choose to do that should be celebrated just the same.
I want to ask you about the timing of your book and the stories that you share, because it's not just your story, but there are interviews with other women that dealt with all kinds of different things, some dealing with depression, suffering with miscarriage. There are a lot of different topics covered in Love Mom, but talk a little bit about your decision to write the book and why now felt like the right time.
So as the concept or the idea of this book was starting to be formed, and I was asked if I would be willing to open up and to share my story. I mean, my story is not unique, but, it is an unconventional journey into motherhood. And I've certainly faced some trials and tribulations along the way. But I wanted to be able to share many other stories so we could just talk about even more topics to be more relatable to everyone. Because there's no greater gift than being a mom. But we're all dealing kind of with the same stuff, and we have to know that other people are dealing with it too, and we're not in it alone. And so when I spoke to the moms and I asked them to be a part of the book, I said, the only thing is you have to really peel back the layers of that onion. I want you to be your authentic self. I'm doing that. I am just bearing it all. It's not like social media where you put your best foot forward and just make everything look great. Like, you really have to be honest with the person reading this book. And so that's what I asked of the other moms who are a part of the book, and they did that. And as you mentioned, we touch on a lot, from depression, suicide, cancer, blended families, divorce, adoption, so many other things. And it's great to see that some of these things that maybe you feel like you're dealing with and kind of feel lonely with in it sometimes, to know that other people are dealing with it too. And there's a lot of sources of inspiration, little bits of advice and scripture, and so much in this book that I think it is just an incredible book for anyone that reads it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm looking forward to diving into some of those stories, some of those inspirational moments throughout the book on the other side of the break, but we're going to fit in a quick break right here. Stick with us. We'll be right back with more Faith versus Culture. Welcome back to Faith versus Culture. I'm here with Dan Andros, and we're here with Dr. Nicole Saphier, author of the new book, Love Mom. I'm excited to talk more about some of these stories, but I know, Dan, you had another question you wanted to fit in for Dr. Saphier first.
Yeah, because just touching on what she was kind of hitting on there at the end of last segment and talking about not just painting this perfect picture and, only our happy social media pictures. Parenting is certainly messy. I have 4 kids myself, aged 19 down to 8. And so I wanted to just ask you, if you could maybe tell us the age of your kids and kind of, so we know where you're at about in this journey. And also just, what do you find are sort of the greatest challenges of parenting and motherhood?
Well, so my oldest son, so I have 3 boys. My oldest son is 24. He's already graduated from college, and he's actually just graduating flight school as well because he wants to be a commercial pilot.
Oh, cool.
And then my younger boys are 11 and 9. So kind of different ends of the spectrum right now. And they all have very different personalities, very different demeanors. Kind of one of the things, and the fact that I was so young when I was raising Nicholas is essentially has allowed me to kind of make some changes with the younger kids. But one of the things that I've noticed throughout the 24 years of being a mom is, we question ourselves a lot. And there are times when you feel like your kids don't like you. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's especially those adolescent years, it gets a little tricky in there, let me tell you. But at the end of the day, as long as you stand true to your convictions and you make sure that you are not deviating from some of your values, it's okay for them to be mad at you. They may not like you in the moment, but that moment is temporary. And I guarantee that you are instilling in them, fundamental characteristic traits that is going to benefit them for their entire life. So it's okay to second guess yourself. It's okay to have those feelings of doubt, but just stay true to yourself, because if you start kind of bending with when they're upset with you, if you really start changing and you don't provide that discipline and structure, then that's going to create an individual that maybe you're not going to be as proud of as they get older.
Something that I've thought has been most rewarding in my life, in my relationship with my mom, my relationship with my dad, is those moments when they're most vulnerable. And especially as you get older and they can kind of start to share with you, like, I actually struggled through going through this too. Like, I'm learning just alongside you as we're experiencing whatever it is we might be experiencing. I know, thinking back to stories about my grandma, she was 15 years old when she had her first child. And my aunt has said it was like we kind of grew up together. So what were some of those conversations like with your oldest child? Did you have those moments of vulnerability saying, look, I'm learning this just at the same time as you are? Like, give us a window into some of that journey.
At the time, it certainly felt more like the parent-child relationship, and I don't think he was as aware that we were doing it at the same time, certainly when he was younger. Now that he is older, we are able to have these adult conversations, and he really sees it that, I was a senior in high school when he was born, and he was at my high school graduation and my college graduation and my medical school graduation. And, looking back now, we can have these conversations, and, because he'll say to me, like, oh, you're doing something different with the younger boys than you did with me. And then we talk about that, because I don't want him to feel like he was treated any differently. It's just, I didn't know what I was doing. So I've learned some things, but so it's great to be able to have those adult conversations with him now.
Yeah. I wanted to let's get into the book here. You have these inspiring collections of stories, these first person stories. Tell us about, touch on some of those that we can expect to see in this book.
So not only do you really get, down and dirty into my story, but we also have a lot of other Fox moms that people will recognize, from Ainsley Earhart, Martha McCallum, Kaylee McEnany, and many, many more. We also have some other moms who are not Fox moms, but they are part of my life. One is a patient of mine, one is a Gold Star mom, and some others. And we also were able to reach out to our Fox viewers, and we asked for submissions for some great mom stories. And after going through over 100 submissions, we did include 2 of them. And so these stories, they're just so far reaching and they're so different, but they are all beautiful in their own way. And every time that I was editing this manuscript, I found myself laughing, crying. I drew inspiration, I took notes, and I've already adopted some of the things that some of the other moms do into my life, because we're always learning. We're always finding ways to maybe do something better, do something differently. And, one of my favorite parts of this book is all of the moms submitted scriptures, submitted quotes, and some one-liners or some little tips of advice. And we put it in the center of the book in this beautiful color-coded pamphlet for easy reference, because like I said, I love to reference my teen Bible when I was younger, and I was needing that source of strength. So I wanted to make sure we could do the same here.
Was there any one story, this is probably a hard question to answer, but was there any one that kind of sticks out in your mind as this story really surprised me, or it challenged me? There was something about this mom's story that was like, wow, as I'm reflecting on that's really impacting me.
Yeah, so Janice Dean, who is, I don't know if anybody knows, but she's senior Fox News meteorologist. I think most people know Janice Dean. She is a force to be reckoned with. She's a beautiful person inside and out. And, she's very honest. She is an incredibly honest person. And in the book, she essentially said, I didn't actually think I wanted to have kids. But isn't that so interesting? Because women, sometimes we feel so much pressure, like this is what's next, or we have to do this right now. And she was just very honest, saying that wasn't really part of my plan. But it was. She just didn't know it at the time. It became a part of her plan. And she just goes into, her autoimmune disease diagnosis and just how her entire story has unfolded, and how she always takes adversity and turns it into points of strength. A lot of people know that about her, but she really goes into the depths in this chapter. And I, for one, was just internally grateful for her honesty.
Yeah, for sure. Look, the book is so full of so many stories that I think will be encouraging to so many people. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk about it. Thank you for writing it. The book is Love Mom, Inspiring Stories Celebrating Motherhood. Dr. Saphier, I enjoyed our conversation. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, stick with us. We'll be right back for another segment of Faith versus Culture here on the CBN News Channel. Welcome back to Faith versus Culture. I'm here with Dan Andros. Dan, that was such a good conversation, I think, to have, because as you alluded to in a few of the questions that you asked Dr. Saphier, in our culture today, it does seem like motherhood is kind of villainized. I remember, I don't know if this was last year or maybe the year before last, but Stevie Nicks, the artist, Fleetwood Mac, she said, if I had not had an abortion in 1979, I never would have been a successful recording artist. And there were so many pro-life people who spoke up and said, that's just not true. You can have success. It might look different than what you think it should look like, or it might not be success by the world's definition. But of course, there's nothing more important than motherhood and fatherhood in this life. So I think it's important to talk about these topics. And like Dr. Saphier has shown, you can have success. You can even have worldly success. It just might be on a different timetable than you're expecting.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say is Dr. Saphier obviously proves that. And she's not the first woman to have a child young and then go on to have a successful career. And, it's interesting that there is that dynamic out there, and that there is that pressure on women, particularly young women, to have an abortion. And it's just incredibly demeaning, as I said, to women to say, like, you can't do it. This is going to stunt you. I mean, the stubborn people out there will go, you know what? I'm going to prove you wrong. And it's interesting to me that on the one hand, we have a culture that's willing to just celebrate women and say, rah, rah, women. But then the minute they face an obstacle, you can't do that is the mantra that comes out. That seems contradictory. Either these women are amazing people who can do amazing things like have a child and have a career, or they're not. And then they need to just kill the child. And so it's a frustrating dynamic that's out there, and one that Dr. Saphier certainly proves wrong, and so many other women everywhere prove wrong. And I think it just takes that humility to understand in that situation that, hey, maybe this isn't going to play out exactly as I wanted to, but I'm going to trust God in this situation, and I'm going to see where he leads me. And I think it's just submitting yourself to the will of God and having peace with that is critical.
Yeah, for sure. I think another thing that's important too, and I was reminded of it as Dr. Saphier was talking about it when she said as a teenager, she felt kind of lonely, obviously, as the only teenager, the only girl in her class who was walking the halls of her school and was pregnant. I'm sure has to be a terrifying and at times emotionally, psychologically crippling thing to go through. It just reminded me of the importance of the body of Christ, right? The importance of the church. People make mistakes. They do things they shouldn't do. They're put in situations that are outside their control at times. And in certain events, pregnancy ends up as a result of that, whether it's by choice or not. And I think it's important as believers that we rally around those people and say, look, this wasn't the right decision. You made a wrong decision, or something went wrong. But we're here to support you because you're valuable and the life that you're now carrying is valuable. So as a body of believers, coming alongside each other in situations like that is so critical. And this conversation was just a good reminder of that, that life is important and we should all value both lives, the life of the mother and, of course, the life of that unborn child. So definitely an important conversation to have on this Mother's Day weekend. So everybody stick with us. We'll be right back to wrap up this week's episode of Faith versus Culture. That is all the time we have for this week's episode of Faith versus Culture on Mother's Day weekend. Thank you so much for being here on the CBN News channel. If you haven't already, head over to cbnnews.com. You can subscribe to our Quick Start newsletter, never miss any of the news of the day, and also our Quick Start podcast that airs every weekday morning with Dan Andros, Billy Hallowell, and I on that show. But again, that's all we have time for on this week's episode. Thank you so much, and God bless you.